Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. We're doing something different in the studio today. Doug Muzzio, the host of CityTalk, and I are combining our shows to talk about this extraordinary presidential campaign. And we're doing that with Jerry Goldfeder, one of the country's leading legal experts on campaign finance and election law. So welcome, both of you.
Good to be here.
Can you, you both are very familiar with campaigns and stuff like that.
As are you.
Thank you, I am. But can you remember such a campaign, so divisive, that the two most unpopular candidates? I mean, can you remember anything like this?
Not in my life.
No, not in my life, really. I guess the closest that it comes to is 68, you know, where you had George Wallace, you know, on the extreme, you know, on the right. You had an unpopular but popular Richard Nixon. You have Humphrey coming in. It was a time of disturbance.
With
just like this is a time of
with a
disturbance.
background, though, of the Kennedy-McCarthy rivalry.
It was a divisive election in the sense that the country was really ripped apart by Vietnam, by the war at that time.
Right.
But the candidates did not provoke this kind of animosity.
One of them wasn't nuts, as Peggy Noonan said.
So what is the historic comparison to the Vietnam War? Is it the desire for the cynicism about politics and politicians?
No,
the desire for something different? What compares to it in this?
I think it's different. I think Vietnam in many ways was very optimistic that you could stop the war, that you could, you know, make the peace. I mean, it was difficult, it was violent sometimes, but I think there was hope that there was resolution, and there was no dearth of trust in national institutions, whether the executive branch, the Congress, the media, churches. I mean, you had a much different era in terms of the culture.
Well, I have a slightly different view, and this is it's a generality. I understand that. I think the '68 election was a generation election in the sense that the older voters were more inclined to support the war than younger voters. Younger voters were very dissatisfied with our political system. Some people felt that we could end the war, we could change the system. Some people opted out completely. What we have now is we have, again, generally, the insiders versus the outsiders. Trump has made that into a slogan, but there's some credence to it. Yeah. And whether we're talking about Republicans or Democrats, there is a culture of insiderness that a growing number of people are dissatisfied with.
The liberal elite is what the great, you know, that.
But it's not just the liberal elite.
Bernie Sanders captured the young people and the excitement for change, right?
But he didn't do it in the emotion that is the motivating emotion, and that is fear. Machiavelli was right. I would rather have them fear than love or hate me.
But they were prompted by hope in a way that was similar to Barack Obama's election. That there was hope that things were going to change if Barack Obama was elected.
Oh yeah.
And we all felt that.
Yeah.
I would say that many of us of our generation felt that for the first time since Bobby Kennedy in 1968.
Yep.
And we don't necessarily have that this year, except that Bernie Sanders appeared to spark that among young people in his campaign.
But you know what's interesting is, for me, Barack Obama would have brought more change had he not had the hostile Congress that he had, I think. But somehow the Republicans, he gets more blame for it with the liberals than the Republicans do. Why is that?
Well, it's true. The Republicans made up their minds on day one. They were going to oppose anything and everything that Barack Obama tried to promulgate. And they stood in the door and they made sure that nothing happened. Well, they didn't totally succeed, obviously, because we did get health care reform. But one of the reasons why, but we have to admit that one of the reasons why there has been not as much success as we would have liked is because Barack Obama was no Lyndon Johnson. Barack Obama did not know how to or did not want to know how to really work with the Congress and try to manipulate the Congress.
Yeah, but
and
there was
so
a
on.
change in the Congress also, and that's a change that we're going to see more, I think, in the future, right? And that was the extreme right, the Tea Party caucus within the House that makes it very difficult for the
It is
Speaker.
difficult. So I'll go out on a limb now and I'll say this, which is assume Hillary Clinton is elected. I think it's a good assumption. Assume that the Democrats take back the Senate, which I think might very well happen. I also think that it's going to be difficult for the Democrats to take back the House.
Yep.
So let's assume for a moment
That you have a
that
split.
we have a Republican House. Hillary Clinton demonstrated in 2001 when she went into the Senate and the years after that she was sturdy enough and disciplined enough that she could work across the aisle. She could work with certain Republicans in order to accomplish certain pieces of legislation. She even worked with people who voted to convict her husband. You know, she made up her mind in this very disciplined, focused way that she was going to do that. I think as president, even if the Republicans continue to control the House, she will succeed much more so than Barack Obama did in terms of working with Republicans. She's just made out of sternest stuff in that regard.
Where is the excitement?
I don't know about Hillary Clinton. I mean, certainly of the two candidates, she is the far superior. I mean, we have a true lunatic, and every, bad word that's been used, misogynist, racist, sexist, etc. But she's got some real deficits going into this election. And there is a legitimate question of honesty and trust, not to the degree that Trump, because he's a pathological liar, but there are significant issues of trust out there. How does she get beyond that?
Well, full disclosure, I support Hillary. I've worked on her campaign, so I'm not disinterested,
Yep.
but I want to be
Yep.
as objective
Yep.
as I can.
Yep.
She's been scrutinized by the media for 30 years. She's been attacked by the media for 30 years. That's a fact. And while she uses that as a defense, it's true. It's true that she has been vilified by the media, and that's seeped into a general feeling among the population. Part of it is of her own doing. She's well defended in terms of the way she leads her life, the way she makes her political decisions, and so on. And sometimes that causes problems. I think that's what we've seen here with the emails. And her ability to explain what the email situation was is very lawyer-like, has been very lawyer-like, has been very untrusting, if you will, about the media who's asking her these questions. I'm hopeful, let's put it this way, I hope that once she is elected, once she takes office, that she becomes more transparent, that she has more people around her who encourage that part of her that's transparent, who are able to say no to her, don't do this because it doesn't look right. Tell people you have pneumonia, it's not such a terrible thing. You know, that kind of kitchen cabinet.
But wait, can I tell she is the first woman to be president. That is historic, right?
Right.
And she is also ambitious and fully, I think, aware of the importance of that. And she is going to use every bit of her ability to be the best president she possibly can have. I think she's smart enough to know the responsibility that's on her shoulders. And I expect that she will be a good president. I think the first indication will be the cabinet appointments. Hopefully that she will expand that circle that has traditionally been around her and bring some more people in. And I guess that's why the paper today say the liberals are looking to Elizabeth Warren to push her, But people have to, I think, always work at it. But I predict good things for her presidency.
Well, it depends what happens to the Republican Party and the type of people that actually are elected in the Senate and in the House, that the fracture within the party may be real.
I think she's going to be more proactive. I agree with Ronnie. She does really, it is historic electing a first woman.
Right.
And she really does feel that in her heart and soul and in her bones. And I think she's going to be a lot more proactive in attempting to legislate and institute policies that are in keeping with her liberal philosophy. I think that she's not going to need Elizabeth Warren
To push her?
To push her. I mean, I think that's really who she is at heart. We'll see.
Let's think. If the Democrats take the Senate, it means that Chuck Schumer is going to be the majority leader.
Yes.
And Chuck Schumer is not known for his independence from the financial world. What's going to happen there?
Chuck Schumer is one of the smartest, savviest politicians
That's
there
right.
are.
All right.
And
Does he have the
Chuck Schumer
message that something has to happen?
Chuck Schumer will play I believe, a very progressive role as a leader of the Senate. It's different than being a senator from New York. He's now the leader of the Senate Democrats and hopefully the entire Senate. He will want to partner with Hillary in a way to create positive change. I'm actually very hopeful about Chuck Schumer as he enters this new role.
And also,
Good to hear.
Chuck could play a role with remnants of the Republican Party and make coalition with them.
Yeah, he's very
Right.
good at that as well.
I mean, that's where his strength
Right.
lies, is cross-party. I mean, nuts and bolts. So he brings 4 or 5 over on key votes that matter.
If anybody can do that, he can do that.
All right, let's go back to your future of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Because that's obviously one of the things that nobody can predict or know. What do you think is going to happen? Is there a Republican Party as we've known it historically?
I think so. I think that the Trump phenomenon, Trumpism, is real. It's going to have some residual effects, but the party in government is still going to be essentially the same. So that's not going to change. Now, if he's not in the White House, that influence will slowly wane. So in and of itself, I think institutionally, the Republican Party will remain. But you have these outside agitators. I think he goes the TV route.
Well, whatever he does personally after the election perhaps is less relevant than
Think
the party.
Go
Oh,
bankrupt?
yeah.
He'll go
He
bankrupt.
can use the laws of the United
Yes.
States to go bankrupt
Right.
if that suits his purposes.
They're
That's
going to
right.
take Trump off of everything, so I don't know.
You see that on the West Side?
Yeah,
I see
right.
that there's
Yes,
a movement
yes.
Yeah.
to get
Thank
rid
God
of
for
Trump.
the West Side, right? We should tell everybody we're both from the West Side.
Right, right.
Ooh, no.
In 1964, the Republican Party was dead because
Yes.
Barry Goldwater
Yep.
was slaughtered. In 1972, the
Democratic
Democratic
Party
Party
was
was
dead.
dead because
And
McGovern
then 84,
was
they
slaughtered.
were dead.
So, parties are very resilient entities.
agree.
And they're not monolithic.
No.
So there are, quote unquote, wars within the Democratic Party from time to time, the Republican Party from time to time. I don't pretend to be an expert on the Republican Party. I'm just not. But just looking at it as an objective observer, that they will regroup. There will be leaders, there will be insurgents, there will be people who are a little wacky, there will be people who are much
A little
more
bit more
aligned.
wacky people. But I mean, yeah, marginally. Or maybe not so marginally.
Paul Ryan will want to make a contribution as a leader
Yep.
if he's still the speaker, and he will work with Chuck Schumer and Hillary Clinton because he will want to succeed as a speaker.
Yep.
Do you think the Trump voters, are there any figures that the Trump voters are first-time voters or not regular voters?
Oh, I think he's brought into, he's going to bring into the voting booth people who've not voted before. I think Bernie Sanders
Yep.
did that
Yep.
In the
And
primaries. That's a good thing.
and you best see it
Well,
in
will
the
they
exit
stay?
polls.
Will they stay? Isn't that a big question? Will they stay in the process?
Well,
Well,
that's the challenge.
all
That's
the
always
time.
the challenge.
All the
That's
time.
exactly right.
So there's talk, though, of a caucus within the House already moving to have earlier or later selection of a speaker in a move against Ryan. But they're we don't think that's going to happen?
Well, we have to see what the results
the result
of the election
are, and what kind of lineup is in the House. I mean,
Well,
the
it's
Republicans are likely to retain control, but they could lose. I mean,
Right.
it's margin of error are huge. They could lose 15 seats.
With all their gerrymandering in the Republican districts they've created, are they conservative, more conservative than older districts used to be?
I would
Yes.
think. I
Yes.
would think. I mean, you pack and crack according to partisanship, and the Republicans are masters at. In Texas, they've totally loaded the game.
Pack and crack is a gerrymandering term. It's what state legislatures do in order to keep certain groups within a district so that they control that district, but then they have less of a chance of winning in other districts.
And then
So
they tend
Trump's
to pack
claim that this is a rigged system, and if he thinks that he's been denied votes, he's going to challenge it. How does he challenge? He has to challenge state by state, right?
Well, first of all, this business
Yeah.
about a rigged system.
Yeah, let's talk
it's,
about that.
Go ahead.
It's really it's a little ironic, I should say. We have a system for electing a president that goes back to the founders. We have 50 different states with 50 different election laws. We have 51 jurisdictions because
Yeah,
Washington, D.C.
D.C.
votes. So we have 51 jurisdictions, 51 different election laws relating to registration, ID, recounts, and
when
so
you
on.
can vote, everything.
Polls open,
And-
early
Yeah.
voting, all that. kind of-
Exactly. And then you have over 3,000 counties in the United States implementing the laws of these states. So neither Vladimir Putin nor anybody else can rig this election. It's ridiculous. But if anybody has quote unquote rigged this election, it's been the Republicans. In 2010, the Republicans won in a wave election.
Yep.
Part of it was against Obama's policies in his first 2 years.
Yep.
Part of it was the Republicans were very well organized and focused their attention and their money into recapturing the state legislatures. And they did. They captured many state legislatures after 2010. And what they started to do was enact much more restrictive voting laws.
And drew lines.
They drew lines that made it more difficult for Democrats to win. But with regard to voting and rigged elections, on this point, they put in a lot of states put in restrictive voting laws. And then the Supreme Court of the United States eviscerated the Voting Rights Act provision that deals with preclearance for certain states. So the Republican legislatures in a variety of places around the country have been able to put in restrictive voting laws, making it a lot more difficult for, guess who, African Americans, disabled people, elderly people to vote, groups that skew Democratic. Now, we've had some successes, especially in the last few months, in the courts. In fact, one court relating to North Carolina's restrictive voting, one court said that the legislature there enacted the laws with, quote, surgical precision in order to depress African American votes.
Ironically, it's the same thing that Trump is claiming is where the corruption in voting is going to be.
That's exactly right. That's the irony of the whole thing. If there's any weighing of the system, it's against the Democrats, not against the Republicans, and it's because of the Republican legislatures over the last few years.
Yeah.
But he can cause mischief by filing lawsuits state by state.
He can.
Right.
But I think the vote is going to be, the margins are going to be sufficiently large
That he can, he has no
that
grounds.
Even if you have 2 or 3 Floridas, your advantage may be large enough to withstand that.
That's right. That's right. The Electoral College vote, it's my educated guess, is going to be sufficiently large that even if there are a few close states where you can go to court and yell and scream and carry on and so on, so what?
Let's touch on the two Hillary Clinton strategies then in the last 2 weeks. One is a landslide strategy, put yourself and your surrogates and money in a lot of different places and attack, and then force him to defend himself in states that he shouldn't defend, sort of Mao's approach, attack at all points at the same time. And then a more targeted approach.
You think Hillary would accept being called a Maoist?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Probably privately, but in a public email, she would be against it. And then the second one is a more safe, stick to the battleground states, make sure you win those, and then forget about the lower races. But are they the two strategies, and which one in your gut do you feel is going to work?
Well, I think what the strategy
or
is,
both work.
I think what the strategy is to really run up the numbers and have a huge electoral college majority, but at the same time to try to win as many Senate seats and congressional seats as possible. I think that's where the focus is.
Well, even the president is now supporting local state offices.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's-
They are moving down.
Which he should have done in 2010.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But which the
it's too
Democratic
late.
Party should have done when Howard Dean wanted them to do it.
Howard Dean had this 50-state staff
Yeah.
strategy,
Yeah.
and
We wouldn't have had any of this.
That's right.
And it's amazing, isn't it? So who controls, this is another question.
Uh-oh.
Who controls the Democratic Party? Who is this Democratic National Committee? How do you get to be on it? How do you know what they're doing?
You don't know.
You don't.
Except
Well-
if WikiLeaks releases.
Well, I looked it up.
emails.
I tried to Google it. I mean, have you seen it? The size of the staff? What are they doing?
Well, just so the viewers understand, the Democratic Party is no different than the Republican Party.
Exactly.
The people who are on the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee are either appointed by the President of the United States or essentially through the leaders of the states, and because we have representatives from all the states. But it's always really controlled by the occupant of the White House. Hillary will put her stamp on the Democratic National Committee, just like Barack Obama did. And Barack Obama's Democratic National Committee didn't do very much because it's not as if he really wanted a robust, vibrant Democratic National Committee. It was, the Democratic Party is Obama's party. And it remains to be seen how Hillary will use the Democratic National Committee in order to party build, in order to bring more people into the process in the states and nationally.
But it is really, as Bernie Sanders said, it is not an open thing. It does perpetuate the people in power when you think about it.
Of course it does.
Yes.
So you're
That's
already,
what parties do. Parties.
don't they look for new talent? No.
Well, here we have a political scientist. And when I was a political scientist many years ago, before I was a lawyer, I learned a few things. One of the things I learned, and maybe the literature still upholds this, so you'll tell us,
I'll verify.
is that party elites do not want to open the process.
Exactly.
Because they want to control.
Yes.
They want to
That's
control
totally
things.
true.
And also, I mean,
If they did, you and I would be doing different things.
We would be.
Absolutely. Because
That's
we've
true.
always been outsiders in a way.
That's right.
so
Outsiders trying to be insiders, but sticking to being outsiders.
yeah, I know that's the problem.
So what do? How do you bring more democracy to the whole system?
Outside the system, you got to
Or change the system.
Well, I don't know about change. I think the answer is movements on the outside that force the elites. I mean, that's what Trump did. I mean, whether you like it or not, that was the exact strategy. He redrew the line, dividing the.
But it
the
was hard
United
to do that
States.
because he didn't do it on issues, right?
Well,
what did he do?
did.
What was
he
responsible
did do
for
it
his
on
rise?
issues, but it's issues in a very, very narrow, contentless sense to us, but to the intended audience, the issue resonates, and it resonates powerfully, and it resonates intensely.
What was the issue?
Well, fear, questioning globalization, trade, the lost future, the whole thing. That's what he did. It was symbolic. So he's making America great. It's fundamental. It's a bumper sticker presidency. It's
What
a
do you
bumper
think?
sticker
Do
campaign.
you agree?
Well, I agree with Doug in the sense that change usually comes from outside the system. But the system is very resistant to change. There needs to be a real popular movement. On the other hand, I would say the real way of changing a system is internally, by running people for local offices, by running people for party offices, and taking over within.
But you do both.
But you do both. It's very difficult. You take a look at the Bernie Sanders people.
Yeah.
And they made a real, never mind Bernie as a candidate, but the people who supported him, they made a real contribution by their numbers, by their votes. But then they're going to go away. They're not going to run for local county committee offices or district leader offices or state committee offices. That's what they should be doing. They should be doing that in order to take over the party and changing the direction of the party. Elites make it difficult for them to do that by election laws. So it's hard work, but change is hard work.
And also, we then should talk about the electoral system, whether we nominate people in the right way. I think that some of you have, either of you, I don't remember which one, has a position about changing it. But we're going to take a short break.
Okay.
And Doug, it's going to be yours when we come back.
Can I pick up the same question?
I hope so.
It's up
That's
to
why
you.
I gave it to you.
Thank you, Ronnie and Jerry. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is CityTalk. Let's start with the question that Ronnie just left you with. The nomination process produced Donald Trump. What can be done in the nomination process to make it more rational, and maybe even Hillary Clinton? Let's look at both of them. You have Donald Trump, 17 candidates, and finally he becomes the nominee. And then you have Clinton and Bernie fighting it out and ultimately winning. But it starts in Iowa, and it goes to New Hampshire, and then it goes to South Carolina, and then it goes to Nevada. And these states are totally unrepresentative of the nation at large. And we slog through this long campaign, and then we produced what is arguably one inferior candidate and perhaps two. What do? Let's reform the process at the beginning.
Well, I don't know why you think that Hillary Clinton is an inferior candidate. You could say what you will about Donald Trump.
She's not a likable candidate.
I like her,
All right.
and I understand she's likable enough.
Yeah, right.
President of the United
The
States
Obama,
said that.
right.
Go ahead.
But you know people who are close to her, and
I don't understand why the
She's
animosity. I have to tell you,
she's a very, very warm,
I don't
engaging
either.
person.
except that it's just a continuation. That's all. It's just her husband was the president. You know, it's just.
That's a different issue.
Yeah,
I think
it
that's
really
what gets
is.
mixed up, though, with her.
Yeah,
it's not change to people, and you say that the undercurrent is change.
That's different. That's different. That's
Yeah,
legitimate.
I can't understand
And
why
that's
people don't like her. I really
intellectualizing
don't.
it.
I don't.
It's visceral.
All right,
I
anyway,
don't
let's go back.
understand the visceral. Okay, go ahead.
Let's go back to the.
I mean, but you know, she's actually a warm, engaging
Yes, right.
person, and
Anyway.
it's hard being on the public stage. A, in general, and B, when you're a woman. I don't have to tell you. You made the point a few moments ago, and you've made the point all your life. It's very difficult for women still.
Yep.
In politics, there's just no question about it.
A woman cannot be ambitious. That's number one. But Hillary has been attacked since since her husband was governor of Arkansas. I mean,
But she's always been ambitious. She's always been her own person.
Exactly. Since she was a law student, actually.
Yeah.
Since she graduated from, where did she?
Wellesley.
Wellesley, and gave the speech at graduation. She has always been an assertive, aggressive, ambitious person.
Right.
What's wrong with
That's
that?
a good thing.
In a man.
If you're wearing
In a man.
this outfit, it's a good thing.
In a man.
And it's good in a woman too.
Yeah, but
We don't. Yes.
there's a problem with that in our culture.
Okay.
still.
Answer the question.
So the question is that the nomination process that produced Donald Trump can either be seen as flawed because he's such a flawed candidate, or the other candidates really just didn't catch on. And that's what happens in contests where you have somebody who is acting as a bully and so on and gobbling up a certain plurality of the vote, and the others don't catch on in a way that really was able to challenge him. But let's look at it. Let's look at it structurally.
Yeah.
Let's look at it structurally. It's absolutely ridiculous that we have primaries and caucuses the way we do. Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada. They call it Nevada, by the way.
Oh, excuse me.
The parties have agreed, both the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee, have allowed these states to have this early monopoly, early advantage. In fact, New Hampshire has a law that says
it has to be the first.
The Secretary of State can do it on his or her own. We're going to be the first. We'll change our date no matter what.
You know, it's almost like having a prison in your community. It's jobs and money. But in a
Well,
funny
that's
way.
right. That's
and
yeah.
prestige.
Yeah.
Not with prisons, but
So it really makes no sense. So if we were to change it, to have one big primary vote among all Democrats, among all Republicans,
Later in the season.
at any point in the season,
Okay.
if we had one big primary, then and the winner of that primary, and maybe it would have to be a majority, and if nobody gets a majority, you have a runoff.
Right.
Or maybe we stick with the plurality. But that would be much more representative of the party, because now we have some primaries that allow independents, non-Republicans or non-Democrats, to vote, mainly on the Democratic side. So that's number one. Number two, we wouldn't give the advantage to these small states, to these rural states, and so on. So that might work in terms of the representative nature of the candidates, of reflecting the enrolled members of the particular party nationwide. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a really good idea, and I actually am in favor of it. But there is a negative side to it as well,
Absolutely.
which is one of the good things about having this long, sloggy process that we have, is that you see the weaknesses in the candidates. You have different candidates win different states. You see who really has the resilience. You see who really has the support. And at the end of the day, usually the person who gets the nomination represents the party in this cockabally kind of way that we nominate somebody, but they're usually representative of the party. And you can't say that Trump was not representative of the party.
Oh.
He was. Of course, you can't say that Hillary wasn't. I mean, she won head on
outright.
and so on. So on one hand, you want a more efficient system, a more responsive system, but you also want a system that allows for candidates to, find their footing and get their support and so on.
What about breaking the country up into 5 regions, and then you begin and you rotate the regions every 4 years? That way, you have 5 separate dates separated by time, because events can play a huge role in a single election, and then broaden it out to 5, have them regularly scheduled, rotate them, and it gives you sort of the advantage of both.
I think that's a really good idea. That's been proposed, and for some reason, the parties don't want to do it.
so you have to get on the DNC,
Correct.
the Democrat
So
National
do me a
Republican
favor.
National Committee.
Call the governor and tell him to put me on the DNC.
Okay.
We'll change that.
Let's go to the Supreme Court. Hillary wins.
Yes.
What is-
Justices. Now, do they go to Gartland? Do they
Depends on who wins the Senate.
okay, play
So
both ways.
So, for example, it's she takes office January 20th.
Right.
But the new Senate takes office
It's the
January 3rd.
Third.
So by the time she's ready to nominate somebody, she's working with a new Senate.
Yep.
So let's assume there's a Democratic Senate. She may not want to renominate or nominate him,
Right.
keep that nomination alive. She may want to have somebody who's more progressive. On the other hand, the Republicans who continue to control
Yep.
the Senate, they may say to themselves,
Better now.
we better deal with this now
Yep.
because we're going to get somebody
Yep.
worse
Yep.
from their point of view.
Yep.
So it really just depends on what happens on election
So we're
day.
going to have an appointment by January 4th, 5th.
Well, no.
No, she can't. No,
No,
we
she'll
won't have an appointment by then.
We'll have an appointment. She will make an appointment relatively early.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
sure.
They've
I'm sure
already
that's going to.
decided, don't you think?
Well, I'm not sure that they've
Yeah.
decided, but
Well,
they're dealing with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if Trump wins,
Oh, come on.
what kind of a justice? You're more familiar with him. Is there any particular?
I'm more familiar with him.
No.
He's already told you. He told you.
Yeah, he's going to have a right wing in,
Right.
in the image
absolutely.
of Scalia.
And he's,
okay.
and he's
Forget
given
it.
a list
Forget
of
it.
that
Forget
is
it.
not shiny.
Forget it. Let's go back to voter disenfranchisement a minute. In the decision of the court, it ruled that the pre-clearance provision of the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, was no longer valid. And it really, the reasoning was it didn't apply to the states. It was outdated, the criteria. And immediately, I think the same day, Texas had the strictest photo ID law in the nation. Then North Carolina did it. North Dakota had a law, but it was defeated. Why did the court limit so much? What was the rationale for limiting?
So let's just go back a second. So the Voting Rights Act that Lyndon Johnson and the Democratic Congress passed in '65 had a number of provisions. The main provisions is Section 2 and Section 5. Section 2 is you can't discriminate throughout the country. You can't discriminate against African Americans, language minority groups,
Right.
and so on. And that applies across the board in the entire United States. So if there is that kind of discrimination already going on, you can go to court. So number one, it has to have gone on.
Yep.
It has to, you have to have been harmed.
Yep.
You have to show, and then you have to have the resources and the time to go to court, which is a timely, expensive proposition, and you have to prove that they intended to discriminate. That's Section 2. Across the board, but limited because it really requires a lot of time and effort and so on. Then there was Section 5. Section 5 says, in certain states where there's been discrimination, the Department of Justice or a three-judge court, but mainly the Department of Justice, has to, quote-unquote, pre-clear any kind of electoral change that goes on. So whether you're going to change the way you elect a mayor from, or elect a city council from districts versus at-large seats, something really big, or you're just moving a polling site, any kind of change in that jurisdiction has to be pre-cleared by the Department of Justice. So mainly that's the southern states, but also New York City, 3 counties, Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Manhattan. And there are parts of Alaska were included, and various parts of different parts of the country. So the great thing about Section 5 was that before any change occurred, the Justice Department had to approve it.
Gerrymandering, etc.
Everything, anything and everything. So that actually prevented states and localities from enacting really bad restrictive laws.
That they've done now.
And by the way, so that was enacted in '65, and then it was reauthorized.
82.
And it was reauthorized as recently as 2006.
Yep.
Almost unanimously by the Congress of the United States.
Yep.
Signed by President Bush.
Yep.
Nevertheless, it was challenged, And the challenge was based upon the formula by which Section 5 was to be implemented.
Right.
Which states, which counties, which parts of the country should be under the thumb, if you will, of the Justice Department. And the Supreme Court of the United States says the formula used in order to decide that it should be Alabama, but it shouldn't be California. It should be Manhattan, but it shouldn't be Putnam County or whatever. That formula was outdated and therefore unconstitutional, which totally eviscerated the implementation of Section 5. The irony of that is that the Congress of the United States had all these hearings and so on, and they adopted this formula. Nevertheless, the Supreme Court of the United States said formula is no good, and therefore Section 5 is no good. Therefore, anybody could do anything. Anybody can do anything, and Doug is absolutely right. On the 2 minutes after the Supreme Court of the United States eviscerated Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, they enacted these very restrictive voting laws that we've had to fight in courts. Sometimes we've been successful.
You were
in
a
the last few
litigant,
years.
weren't you, in one of the cases?
Well, I've represented people who have fought back
Yeah.
against some of these laws.
So they've
Yes.
eliminated polling places, making it harder for voters to go. They've cut down the voting time.
That's right.
They've changed, in one state, they eliminated Sunday voting,
Yeah.
which is in a,
Or
to
the Sunday early voting.
Yeah.
directly directed at really the African American population who used to have to go from church to the polls.
Right, souls to the polls.
Yes.
So they've eliminated that in some degree
Yeah.
in some states.
So they
That's right.
have. Now, could that be remedied by new legislation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the challenge here,
And it can be remedied by court decision, too.
right, but when you have the
It'd be
Supreme
easier for the
Court,
Congress.
that's right, the Congress would have to pass a formula
That's
that
relevant.
would be
Yes.
relevant by the Supreme Court standards.
Yep.
I think it's a bogus decision by the Supreme Court of the United States, but they
But hopefully,
won the day 5 to
hopefully,
4.
Yeah,
we'll,
Shelby.
hopefully we'll have a different viewpoint on the court.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I mean, Shelby versus Holder was a plethora of 5-4 decisions that
And
constrained.
let's talk a little bit about finance, campaign
Yes,
finance.
that's
How
where that's
expensive.
where I'm going now. Again, the Supreme Court, in terms of finances, is struck with corruption as the defining variable, and they leave out all kinds of other considerations. What about the legal elements of their decision and Citizens United, McCutcheon?
Well, Hillary Clinton is on record as being against Citizens United, and there are any number of Democrats who want to overturn
Yeah.
it. Citizens United stands for the proposition that you can give an individual, a corporation, a union, can give unlimited amounts of money to a super PAC, and they can spend unlimited amounts of money either on behalf of a candidate or against the candidate.
And this is under their free speech rights.
Right, with the premise that these super PACs are not corruptible because they are separate
Separate.
and apart, not coordinated, separate and apart from a candidate. Well, of course, this is nonsense. Because if you have Mitt Romney's super PAC, or if you have Barack Obama's super PAC, or if you have,
Hillary, I mean,
Jaime
anybody.
Ankel's super
Yeah.
PAC,
They
there is
know.
a relationship
Yeah.
there. It's a legal fiction in a lot of cases, and nevertheless, this has allowed tremendous amount of money into the system that's unregulated and has really tainted the entire presidential system, such that I think the 2012 it was $6 billion.
Yep.
Incredible.
Now God
Big
knows
God
how
knows
much
it.
money.
And you'll never know because a lot of the money is dark money.
Yeah.
Is the saying that a corporation is a person, does that come out of Citizens United?
No.
No,
Where did that come out of?
14th.
it's
I think
it's been around for quite some time.
Was
Yeah.
it? It was Romney who really talked about that.
Well, what Romney said was something. I think he said, "Well, corporations are people too," or
Right.
Yes.
He was just trying to humanize corporations.
I thought he was.
Which is hard to do.
Yeah, well,
I mean-
he had a certain sense of ruining any English sentence.
How do you change a Supreme Court decision?
By another one.
How did we change the Dred Scott decision, which
War.
said that African American slaves were property? The culture changes, the political system changes, the justices
Yeah.
change.
So
and it takes time.
what action makes that happen?
Well, in this case, the war.
Well,
and
No,
then
I
the
don't mean that,
13th,
but I mean,
14th,
Well,
and
in-
15th.
how
right.
do you get rid of Citizens United? You
The
have a
way-
new case?
we have-
You have legislation.
Well, you can. There are two ways.
Two.
Which is through legislation. Okay. Or we have a new Supreme Court justice and a new case that comes up that deals with the same issue, and we now have a majority.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the same thing with Roe. I mean, looking
Right.
at it from the other perspective,
Right.
they're just waiting for one justice, and they do it.
Yeah, well, they're not going to get him.
Well, because Hillary's going to win.
Right.
Let's go back to voter disenfranchisement. What other means have jurisdictions used to disenfranchise people? I just want to know the nefariousness of all these activities.
Well, Ronnie went through this a few minutes ago. We'll just take early voting. We don't have early voting
No.
in New York. We don't have.
We don't
No.
have anything in New York.
No.
As a matter of fact, in one of the cases, I think it was in North Carolina, where the government lawyers, the Attorney General of the state, was defending these restrictive voting laws. And one of his defenses was, we're not as bad as New York. And he went through a whole litany of what we don't do in New York. We don't have same-day registration. We don't have early voting. We don't make it easy for people to vote by mail through absentee ballot.
He's right. He's right.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
This is Stalin.
So why
It's
are
not
we?
Stalin,
Why are
it's
we
just-
this? This is again because of the state legislature.
It's
Why?
because of the state
Yeah.
legislature. And for some reason, the Republicans seem to think that expanding the vote hurts them.
Yep.
Again, I don't pretend to understand their thinking, but on some level it doesn't make sense to me, because in areas that are where Republicans do well, expanded voting will help them. If they're not going to do well, if it's a Democratic district, it's irrelevant.
It doesn't become an election issue. You never hear any kind of revolt by the citizens. You know,
Right.
It's
Because it feels too procedural. It feels too.
in the state of elitism of elites. Wouldn't we be?
It's not a pocketbook issue.
Yeah.
It's not. It doesn't affect people's real lives. They think it does.
Yeah.
Because it changes who we elect, who make the laws that have an impact on our pocketbooks, but it's a little too removed, so therefore you're absolutely right. There's no groundswell for that reform.
Let's say Trump loses the election. What will commentators be saying about him or Trumpism in a year, 5 years, 10 years? What telescope out, speculate what it looks like if
No, but you can't do
if
that.
he should
Doug.
win.
You can't. You mean if he loses?
I mean, if he loses.
Yeah, you can't really do that because it depends on the margin of Hillary's victory. It depends on what she does as president. It depends on what he does
Right.
going forward.
Right.
Well, don't you think his business has been affected by this?
It's hard to
Oh.
know.
If his
It's hard to know.
why his trademark, that was his main business. Who wants to have his name, as we can see on the West Side?
Well, the
Who wants to have
the 40%
his name?
who are going to vote for him.
Well, the people on the West, people on the West Side, we're different than the rest of the
Yes.
country. In case you had noticed.
Yes.
I think you're taking the Trump. I still cannot understand how Donald Trump is a serious candidate for the presidency of the United States.
I know.
Can't understand it. And I think in a way we've never really tried to understand how that's happened. It's
Yeah, but it's absolutely
It's
fundamental
jarring.
that we do
it's
understand.
jarring.
It is jarring.
To hear him speak, the way his lack of respect, his lies. It's jarring. So, what do we think about the press coverage in general? What do you think about
Well,
it now?
I think the press coverage created Frankenstein, and now they're trying to kill him.
What do you think?
I don't know that they created him. I think that they went along for the ride.
Well, they actively facilitated his
Well, they
rise.
did because
He's
he
television.
was a
was news,
media
yeah,
candidate,
yeah.
and he
Yep.
is news.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's what the media
Yep.
does. They
Yep.
cover it.
Yep.
And they didn't take it as seriously as all that.
Yep. That's what I meant.
On some levels, some outlets thought it was a joke, but it was entertainment no matter what. It
So-
didn't get, and the seriousness of his candidacy, seriousness in a negative way, the fact that someone like this could be a candidate for president of the United States, that seriousness didn't really strike most of the media until it was too late.
But even his performances in the Republican debates, his arrogance with Bush, it was all unbelievable to me.
Yeah, because you
Nobody
are
No, but I don't
You know,
think-
you live in the Upper West Side of
No,
Manhattan.
that's ridiculous.
No, and in your
The
circle
press
of
did not-
friends, you don't go to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and listen to the people with their.
I'm sorry. Any kid who goes through school and talks about and knows there's a president of the United States is not used to. I mean, it's a shock to see somebody lie and
Oh,
distort. And I think you're right. The press went along with it for a while, but they didn't pay attention to it enough in the Republican primaries.
I think that's right.
They didn't put him down and complain about the way he
Well,
treated
and
other
one of the
people.
problems was that most of the candidates
Right.
didn't fight
No,
back
but that was
for
that was
quite a
it.
long time.
Right. How do you fight back with such a bully?
Well, you look
It's
at
an
Jeb
interesting
Bush.
thing.
It's like
He's
standing there like, what? What? What?
Right.
How do you deal with this? You know, when you're running for office, and whether you're a Bush or anyone else, you're dealing with other people. There's a certain civility. You have disagreements, you get angry and so on, but you're dealing with issues and so on. He called him a loser with no energy and so on. Well, how does somebody with Bush's upbringing deal with that?
Well, how does somebody like
It was a question of surprise. He did, Sun Tzu, he says, you surprise your enemy, you deceive him. He surprised them. Exactly what you talked about. He shocked them. They couldn't figure it out.
Then what do
it
you
wasn't in the play.
Well, at least-
and it took them a real long time to figure it out. What the larger issue is that politics has become the mass entertainment in the United States. And that is why Trump excelled at it.
But you
It's
know what?
mass
Let me
entertainment.
interrupt you for a minute. The Bush, at least, is not supporting him, right? But the guy who he said is a loser, I don't like people who are taken prison. He has not really. Has he opposed Trump yet?
Yes.
I think he's
Finally, it's a lack
disendorsed
of
him.
courage on the part of candidates, also.
Yeah, but I mean,
I think there's a basic point about it.
You can talk about lack of courage, but when your base rebels and threatens to vote against you, and you know that you're going to lose if you don't have the base, if they sit it out, then principles go by the way of expediency.
Well, that's
you
another-
got to win,
All right. So we haven't even covered.
right?
Well, then you have a guy like Rick Perry, who gave a speech during the primaries saying
Attacking
this
him.
is attacking Trump, that he was a cancer on the Republican Party, and it fell on deaf ears.
Yeah.
Now, he was an imperfect
Yes,
messenger
yeah.
because he's not seen as all that bright himself, but nevertheless, he tried to make that point. But I think by then it was too late.
And Romney too. Romney tried to expose it too, when it didn't work.
Well, I
It
don't
was too
think
late.
Romney was as assertive
No, he wasn't.
about it
No.
at all. If Romney had been much more
He
assertive,
was thinking he was going to get in.
yeah,
think,
he could have.
Yeah.
He just bullied his way and grandstanded his way and entertained, if you call it that, his way into the nomination. He ran against a bunch of people, some of whom are very talented people. I may disagree with them, but they're talented people. And yet he was able to steamroll over them because he had a message. His message was, the system is terrible I'm going to change it. I'm going to fix it.
Okay,
Doug?
I think that time has run out. I think it was a good way to end it. Are you optimistic that Hillary's gonna
I'm
win?
optimistic for, I tell you the truth, I'm optimistic for the election, for Hillary, and I'm also optimistic for this country. Because I think that even though we've experienced this Trumpism in the last number of months that's been so jarring and disgusting and so on.
We're overcoming it.
I think we will overcome it.
By a
What
good
about
vote.
you?
I agree. And I think everybody should get out and vote. People who are saying they're not going to vote are not participating.
Okay.
We have a responsibility to
Okay.
vote.
Thank you, Ronnie and Jerry. It's a pleasure of a sort to stress your belief in the country's electoral system and the responsibility felt by all citizens. You know, if you're 18 years old or older, vote. Do the right thing.